This is Inside Story, the only show about the system by people who lived it. I'm Lawrence Bartley.
I mean, the kids were screaming at the cops, "Don't shoot my dad, he needs help." And then they just shot him.
How frequently are charges brought against an officer?
Rarely, if ever.
We lock black people up in America at 6 times the rate of South Africa during apartheid.
I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing had I not gone to prison. But that doesn't make prison good, though, you know?
Time and time again, we've seen phone cameras and police body cams help reveal what happens during fatal police shootings. But what happens when no one is around to film it? Turns out, that's a question that thousands of people are all too familiar with.
I had just met him right there in the street.
A little over a year ago, Heather Bressler's husband, Gary, started acting strangely. He suffered from depression and could be moody at times, but this was different.
I mean, he was just sitting there watching TV. I was in the kitchen, and I heard him talking to somebody. And one of the kids said, "Mom, Dad went outside with a sword." And he was just standing there in the yard talking to somebody.
Heather says her husband had called 911 and asked her to do the same. Minutes later, Kentucky State Police troopers showed up at the Bresslers' rural property and drew their guns. Heather and her 3 children watched from the front lawn as the officers trained their weapons on Gary, who the family says was standing idly by the end of the driveway, silent and still holding the decorative sword at his side.
They looked at Gary. They told him to drop it. The one cop turned his gun on me and told me to get my effing kids in the house.
Pointing his gun at you?
Yeah, he pointed his gun at me and my kids. And he turned back to Gary, told him to drop it again, and then they just shot him. They just started shooting him. And it was just a matter of a few minutes. I mean, the kids were screaming at the cops, "Don't shoot my dad, he needs help." Because all 3 of his kids were out here.
Gary was shot 7 times and died on scene. Have you learned anything more about that night?
I haven't heard anything. I tried to get the police report and all that, and they didn't give me anything.
So you're just still in the complete dark?
Mm-hmm.
It's been a year. What has it been like? How do you process something like that?
I don't think I quite have with the kids and stuff. Man, my son's taking it real hard. I don't think I've actually quite processed it yet. I mean, I just feel numb all the time.
Rural police shootings rarely make headlines, but Gary Bressler's death is hardly an outlier.
I said arrest! Send those killer cops to jail! The whole damn system is guilty as hell!
The ongoing reckoning with police brutality, which culminated in the national protest after the deaths of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor, has largely focused on urban areas. But despite the lack of public outrage, similar patterns have played out outside of cities too. A recent expose by the Marshall Project and Kentucky Center for Investigative Reporting found that between 2015 and the end of 2020, police fatally shot about 1,200 people in rural parts of the country. Few places exemplify this phenomenon better than Kentucky, where during that period, state troopers shot and killed more people in rural communities, 33 in total, than any other police department in the country. Since then, there have been at least another 5 fatal police shootings, all of them in rural parts of the state. Based on your reporting, why are there so many officer-involved shootings involving Kentucky State Police in these rural areas? What's causing that?
I think that
A lot of the calls they go out on, they're dealing with people who are in a mental health crisis. They don't have a dedicated mental health response team to send out to those types of calls, so they were sending line officers and troopers out to respond to some really delicate mental health situations. A lot of these shootings happened in the most impoverished regions of not only Kentucky, but the entire country. And I think that you could draw parallels with where police shootings happen in urban and suburban areas as well.
One thing that does differentiate rural police shootings from their urban counterparts, how little attention they seem to get. Part of that is just circumstance. When there aren't many people around, witnesses are a lot harder to come by.
There's no other kind of random passers-by or just bystanders that are able to film with their cell phone. There's not a lot of neighbors with ring cameras or surveillance cameras, so if you didn't have your own surveillance camera, it potentially would not have been captured at all.
Small towns are also less likely to have dedicated news outlets, which can help amplify awareness of police shootings. But many departments have also helped preserve a system that makes accountability extremely difficult. The Kentucky State Police still handle all investigations internally, still don't use body cameras, and routinely fight the release of even the most basic pieces of information. The result is an uneven playing field, where KSP wields control over almost all aspects of any individual case, and everyone else is forced to operate in the dark. David Ward knows what it's like to be on the other side. He's litigated nearly a dozen cases involving KSP.
Every time the KSP is involved in something, it is always perks my ears up to see what's going on and what happened.
Why is that?
It's always a he said, she said thing, and a lot of times it's only a he or her said thing from the trooper, and there's never any witnesses involved because in shooting cases, the person ends up dying. And so there's the trooper's version of events, and there's never any body camera footage. And KSP, for some reason, has been pretty resistant to implementing body-worn cameras so that there can be actual transparency.
How much power does KSP have in determining the outcome of some of these investigations?
They control the investigation. They investigate themselves, which, for starters, seems to be a pretty clear conflict. The troopers who are investigating themselves, they know these troopers, they're their friends. And so there is this perception that the investigation isn't as thorough and complete, and that there is testimony or statements are given more credibility to the trooper as far as what occurred than maybe what a witness saw.
KSP is in the process of rolling out a new body camera policy. The department recently announced that it would distribute personal recording devices to roughly 780 officers by the end of the year. In a written statement, KSP's Public Affairs Commander Captain Paul Blanton took issue with comparing the department to others out of state because, quote, a large number of state police agencies across the nation do not respond to 911 emergency calls. And he denied the suggestion that the number of officer-involved shootings was a cause for concern, because it represents such a small fraction of the arrests KSP troopers have made. He also defended the integrity of KSP's investigations and said that the department takes any use of force seriously. But the statement did not respond to the reality that its troopers rarely face repercussions after these kinds of incidents. Despite dozens of fatal shootings dating back to 2015, Vice News couldn't find a single instance in which a KSP officer had been charged.
In your experience, how frequently are charges brought against an officer for, like an officer-involved shooting or an incident like that?
Rarely, if ever. Have I seen charges ever brought against an officer for shootings?
Can you think of any in which a KSP officer has had charges brought against them?
No, not off the top of my head.
Why do you think that is? Is it that they just haven't ever done anything wrong?
I wouldn't go that far, no. But the version of events is more than likely the version of the troopers' events of what transpired, not what witnesses may have seen if there happen to be any witnesses. And it just leads to the grand jury not indicting people.
It seems like the system is kind of set up to allow for all of this to happen. There's almost this veil that's put up.
Absolutely, and it doesn't allow for the families to get information. It doesn't allow for the attorneys who are looking into these shootings to determine whether there's actual civil responsibility that should be imposed against the trooper to get that information that's going to be necessary in order to bring that lawsuit.
In March of 2022, Heather filed a wrongful death lawsuit against the two troopers who shot her husband. Then last December, the local Commonwealth Attorney's Office announced that a grand jury had decided not to bring charges against any of the involved officers. The Commonwealth Attorney's Office didn't respond to requests for comment. When Heather finally received a copy of KSP's internal investigation, it came with a caveat, a proposed protective order that would prevent her from sharing it with the public. The reason? KSP is fighting to suppress the report indefinitely because it claims the material is confidential.
To tell the truth, to be honest, what happened that night. Because they know what happened. They know the truth. It's stressful, it's aggravating, a lot of unanswered questions. It almost feels like it still happened like last week, yesterday. I still sometimes think he's just gonna come home.
Jason Flom is about as high as you can get in the music industry. He founded Lava Records and has led Atlantic and Virgin Records. He's also a friend of mine who spent decades fighting for people who've been wrongfully convicted. Jason, first time I met you, I think, was at a children's event in Sing Sing. And I remember hearing that you was a record company executive. And I always wanted to know what brought you into a prison and what made you begin to be concerned about legal system issues?
Yeah, it was the most random serendipitous thing. I read a story in the New York Post, which I never read the New York Post. I happened to pick it up because the Times was sold out that day, and because I was meant to, I guess. And there was a story about a kid named Stephen Lennon who was serving 15 to life for a nonviolent first offense cocaine possession charge in a maximum security prison in New York State. It was in the newspaper because his mother had been trying to get clemency and had gotten some prominent people to advocate for her son, and yet he had been turned down by Governor Mario Cuomo. I just read this and my mind was blown. I had no idea. I'd had my own issues with cocaine, and this kid he was 32 years old like I was at the time. He had been in prison for 8 years. I'd been sober for almost 8 years because I'd gone to rehab because of the zip code I was raised in and the color of my skin. And I thought, I'm an atheist, but there before the grace of God go I, So I decided I had to do something about it. And I ended up, I guess you call it beginner's luck, but I ended up getting this kid out. And I had the incredible experience of sitting in the courtroom, holding his mother's hand when the judge banged the gavel down and reduced his sentence and sent him home. And I went, wow, that's the best feeling I've ever had. I want to do more of that. And so I never stopped and I never will stop.
Now you have the Wrongfully Convicted podcast. I would imagine that family members hear you speak about exonerations, innocence, all the time. Do they reach out to you? Do you have a process in which you accept cases and go after it to try to help people earn their freedom?
Yes, I do get letters. I get DMs on Instagram. I get, people find my number, they text, they email, they send letters. I get letters in the mail, and it's impossible to keep up, but I try to make an impact in as many cases as I can. The Wrongful Conviction podcast has been a labor of love for me. And it's now in its 12th season. And I'm very proud to say we've impacted quite a few cases and helped to bring a number of innocent people home. And of course, the best cases I always say are the ones we don't know about, where somebody's in a jury room today and they're looking at a Lawrence Bartley, or somebody who may have been in a similar circumstance, and they might be going, you know what? I'm not falling for this bullshit. I've heard too many of these stories on the podcast. That makes me sleep well at night, knowing that we're helping to prevent, in certain cases, these outcomes from happening.
I know from personal experience, as you mentioned, that it's very hard to get out of prison, even if you did a 180 from any type of criminality.
It is that hard, and it shouldn't be. We lock Black people up in America at 6 times the rate of South Africa during apartheid. We lock American citizens up at a rate that is more than 5 times the rest of the Western world per capita. And these other countries have similar crime rates to ours, right? It's not like this is having any benefit to public safety. It's not. The system is designed to take the easy way, which is to take especially young people of color and sweep them up and keep the system churning. And there's a great profit motive in there. There's so many individuals and companies making money on the caging of human beings in this country. And it's sick. It's really sick.
Do you find that stars in the record industry care about the criminal justice system, maybe even halfway as much as you do?
Well, I'm pretty obsessed, let's face it. There are certainly more people today, prominent entertainers, who have spoken out. Kim Kardashian, she's a true advocate. Her heart is in this, and she is not afraid to speak out and take action. And we've worked together on cases like Julius Jones in Oklahoma and Rodney Reed and others. Of course, there are other entertainers, John Legend, Common, Jay-Z, of course. So I hope we will see more. I think it can really help to move the needle. So yeah, I'm glad you brought that up.
Jason, thank you for being my guest. It was an honor to have you here today.
Lawrence, it's great to be here, and it's so great to see you out here making a difference, fighting the power, and I'm just glad to call you my friend.
Thank you.
So to share a little bit about me, I get it all the time. People are just like amazed at how young I look. And they're like, oh, are you a freshman? I'm like, no, I'm a professor at the medical school. And they're like, what? No way, you mean you're in medical school? Perfect. My name is Dr. Stanley Andrisse. I was sentenced to 10 years in prison as a prior and persistent career criminal. So most common forms of Cushing syndrome is this exogenous steroid or glucocorticoid therapy. I sometimes get called Dr. Stan or Dr. Stanley or Professor Stan. This is a slide that is depicting individuals with a growth hormone receptor deficiency. This is looking at children ages 15 to 2. An endocrinologist is someone who studies hormones and how they help the body stay healthy. Not in my wildest dreams, sitting in my prison cell, would I imagine sitting here today, or imagine delivering the lecture that I gave earlier today to the group of students that make up an HBCU like Howard. One of the #1 producers of Black and brown medical doctors in the country. Insulin helps the body bring in glucose, bring in fat, bring in proteins, and then it helps store them for a rainy day. Almost immediately when I went in and started my period of incarceration, my father's health plummeted with type 2 diabetes. I wanted to learn more about diabetes. And that was the start of me sitting here. We're at time, but I'm welcome to go a few more minutes. So it was then, when I read that first article on diabetes, locked in a cage, it was really just to grieve. Like, I was trying to grieve what was going on with my dad and trying to be present with my family in what way I could be. A lot of folks want to know whether, they'll phrase it in a way, did prison help you? And a lot of people are asking it because there's some people that lie on the side of prison is necessary and good, and there's some people that lie on the side of prison is not necessary and not good, and needs to be abolished. It would be maybe 5 minutes before students start coming in. And so the interesting answer is that I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing had I not gone to prison. It helped me to be an endocrinologist, but that doesn't make prison good though, That doesn't make all the traumatic things that I experienced in prison necessary for me to have done good in this world. Tell us 2 truths about yourself and then 1 lie. It doesn't have to go in the order of 2 truths and a lie. I didn't have the understanding that I have now of the systemic things that go into more Black and brown people ending up in prison, and the systemic things that go into more Black and brown people and Black and brown communities being susceptible to diabetes. And it's a lot, it's a lot of the same systemic things. At 8 years old, I can remember the first time a cop pulling a gun on me. Police presence was just like a normal thing in my neighborhood, and running from the cops was like a game to play. It left you with this idea that there's more criminals in my area, so there's more people doing bad in my area. And as a young 8-year-old, you know, how do you internalize that? Is people that look like me turn out to be criminals and bad people. And so when you think about the school system, when you think about the social, political, societal system around communities like this, and then you add in the fact that because of there's these perceptions that there's bad people, there's no businesses that bring in healthy food, and you have these food deserts that are created, you know, so poor education system, food deserts, a societal perception of what it is to be in these environments, and that is the school to prison pipeline and the road to diabetes pipeline. You know, I now kind of try to disrupt both of those systems. These columns compared to these columns. For folks that are listening on the inside, just know that it is literally never too late for you. It's never too late for you to continue dreaming. A lot of times in prison, we're not permitted to dream anymore. In fact, our dreams are crushed, and our beliefs of things that we thought of ourselves being as a child, they're told that we can't do those things anymore. So I encourage you to continue dreaming. I encourage you to really stay connected with being you, your most authentic you. There's nothing wrong with you. You know, you made some decisions that might have landed you in prison, but it's never too late to do the right thing.
Dozens of shootings and not a single officer charged. That's what we learned is going on across rural Kentucky. It won't surprise you that stuff like that really troubles folks. But while people in the free world see police shootings for the tragedies they are, anyone in prison also sees something else. Proof that in America, there are two justice systems, and they don't play by the same rules. Ask anyone who's been incarcerated for violence. They live in the worst prisons, many have long sentences, and all their time is hard time. And earning parole, it's a struggle, no matter how much they change or how sorry they are. In prison, you're constantly reminded that you're there because of some universal principles of right and wrong. And we can accept that. What's fair is fair. But it's harder to accept when you're told over and over again that similar acts are justified as long as they were committed by a cop. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.